Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Ramsey Eisler, Director of Special Projects at CalMatters. Today, we have a special event covering the use of AI in schools as part of our CalMatters for Learning program in partnership with the California State Library. We will hold for questions until the end of the session if we have time. If you have a question, please use the Raise Your Hand feature in Zoom. With that, I'll hand it over to our moderator, Denise.
Hi, I'm Denise Zapata. I'm an editor here and I work with the education team at CalMatters. Here today with Tara García Mathewson, an education reporter who will be leading the discussion. To get us started, I'll just talk a little bit about the context here. Generative AI has upended education, forcing educators to change how they teach and how they assess student learning because of the threat created by powerful free chatbots like ChatGPT. Kara has spent much of the past decade covering technology and education, first for the Hechinger Report, a national nonprofit newsroom, and then the Markup, which CalMatters acquired last year. Tara first investigated the use of newly released AI detectors in higher ed for the Markup and deepened that reporting for CalMatters this year. Her latest investigation, which published today, explores the use of Turnitin at colleges and universities across California and the harms this technology creates on campus. Today, we're going to discuss this investigation and other issues related to AI in education. If you have any questions, we'll turn to them at the end, as Ramsey mentioned. So with that, I'll ask Tara the first question, which is, Tara, why don't you start talking about your Turnitin story that ran today? First, in case people aren't familiar, what is Turnitin?
Yes, so Turnitin is a powerhouse plagiarism prevention company. That's what they say, plagiarism prevention. Part of the idea is the use of this tool will prevent students from plagiarizing in the first place because they know that their essays and assignments are being run through this tool as part of the grading process. Turnitin launched after the internet really first became widely used in the late 90s, kind of early 2000s. Internet made copy paste plagiarism really easy for students. They could go to a website, look something up, copy, paste it into a paper, and then turn it in. And so Turnitin said they could catch that. They expanded their tools over time. They said they could catch the contract cheating that started to be available also because of the internet and paper mills that would allow students to basically buy essays and then turn them in for their classes. Of course, once ChatGPT was released, they also put out an AI detector. This came out 5 months after ChatGPT debuted. And notably, so Turnitin is the largest plagiarism detector company on the market, the most valuable. And notably, it is one of a few that keeps student papers forever. And so to use this tool, schools sign a contract to license Turnitin's product, and they also give Turnitin perpetual, royalty-free, irrevocable license to the student writing that faculty run through the detector.
Tara, how much are colleges and universities paying for it?
Well, my story really looked at how much it adds up over time. So Turnitin, they charge a single campus fee, which I think this year is maybe $1,000. But mostly they charge per student. And so I requested records I got records from almost 60 colleges and universities across California. And the variation is wide in terms of how much they pay per student. So actually, I started this project before the Markup and CalMatters merged, and I live in New York City. And so I requested records from CUNY, the City University of New York. In 2021, CUNY paid $1.79 per student. UC Berkeley that same year for the same product paid $2.11 per student. The Cal States and community colleges in California, they paid $3.03 per student. And I actually found evidence that UC Irvine's continuing education division, they paid $6.50 a student. And so part of the story is that the costs add up over time. I tracked $15 million of spending across these institutions. One of them, so College of the Canyons, is one that gave me their entire spending history over about 20 years. They spent more than $500,000 on Turnitin. But it is also part of the story that some colleges pay more than others.
Tell us about the technology itself. Your investigation describes how it's pretty unsophisticated.
Yeah, and so when I started at the markup in 2023, it was not long after the AI detector had kind of hit the market. Schools were really pretty panicked about what ChatGPT meant for academic integrity. And there was a paper that had come out that showed that AI detectors are more likely to flag as AI generated the writing of non-native English speakers. So for people whose native language is not English, when they write in English, tend to write with a narrower vocabulary, with less varied kind of grammar and syntax structure. And that happens to be the way that AI writes, because AI chooses the next most likely word to create a string of human sounding text that would accurately answer whatever question was posed to it. And so I was interested in this. Obviously, this means that technology is creating a bias in who is being accused of submitting AI generated writing. And so I was looking into that. And of course, I think there's been quite a lot of reporting about how the AI detectors have been kind of faulty, and they create these, you call them false positives when it says that it identified AI generated writing, but it was not in fact AI generated. There's been less reporting, and I think this is just because Turnitin's been around so long and their plagiarism detector has existed for so long. But as I got deeper into this project, it became very clear that the plagiarism checker itself is also quite inaccurate. And I say inaccurate if you're looking for plagiarism. So Turnitin is careful with its wording. It says it does not identify plagiarism. It identifies matching text, which is what it does. And then someone has to read the report that identifies matching text and decide if those words amount to plagiarism or not. So in the story that ran today, we included a screenshot of a similarity report that Turnitin put out. And the main thing that it identified as matching text was the words U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So that's enough words together that match other words in the database that it's searching for it to say this could be plagiarized and flag it for a professor. And so really on both sides, the technology, it doesn't rise to the level of solving the problem that is making people concerned, because the plagiarism detector cannot detect plagiarism. It can only detect matching text. The AI detector cannot necessarily detect AI generated writing. It can detect writing that looks AI generated. And even from there, the story really goes into the gray areas around how students are using ChatGPT, for example, right now. And it is not exactly clear what rises to the level of academic dishonesty with AI tools and what might be perfectly acceptable to professor if a student improves their spelling and grammar using an AI tool, but then that work ends up triggering the detector.
What does this mean for students?
As you might imagine, this means a lot of anxiety. Students, there's just been a ton of accounts online and social media and TikTok and Reddit and Instagram, students describing how they were falsely accused. When I reported on the study about how non-native English speakers were more likely to have their writing flagged, someone reached out to me. She had just a few weeks before had her writing flagged, and she suspected that might be why. She's a native Spanish speaker. So there's basically everybody on campus knows somebody who has been accused, and when they think it was not true, not fair, that they hadn't used ChatGPT. So you have these erroneous accusations. If a student themselves is accused, that can, it can derail a student's focus, commitment. We talk a lot in higher education about imposter syndrome. There are a lot of students who feel like they're not good enough to be there in the first place. If they're trying their best and their professors accuse them of plagiarism, submitting AI generated writing, that's obviously very problematic. And it also means for students that they have to put up with having their writing turned over to a third-party company who can keep it forever and use it to create new tools. And that's what happened to students who had their writing run through the plagiarism detector for so many years. That writing was used to train the AI detector, which of course Turnitin is making more money off right now.
So why is it that Turnitin is still so widely used?
Well, there is a lot of demand from some faculty, and it depends on the institution. So Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo in California, they canceled their contract last year because they said the cost was too high and faculty usage just didn't justify it. And so, there are some places where there is not as much faculty demand. This didn't so much make it into the story, but this idea, like there is in some ways a labor crisis in higher education. You have a lot of adjunct faculty that are giving lots of classes for not that much money across multiple institutions. There are certain types of professors who are likely to want a tech solution to kind of take some burden off of grading and just making it through their work. And there's also just a lot of anxiety. There are professors who, they don't understand how ChatGPT works. There's a company saying there's an AI detector and they can find it and help prevent cheating. And they are just grasping for something to help them kind of get through this crisis. And so there's definitely demand. Using the detectors creates this illusion of action in the face of a problem. And then also there's, in terms of maybe not why they're being used, but why they continue to be licensed. There's some level of, once you do something once, it's easier to renew a contract than sign a new contract. And so a lot of colleges have had this contract with Turnitin and they just keep renewing year after year after year. And maybe there's just not a point where you pause and think carefully about whether this is something, that you should renew for the next year.
Yeah, in your story, you talk when you kind of in this section of the story, you talk about this, and there are some faculty and other experts who think that there's a different solution. I mean, if we're trying to prevent students from using AI to complete their assignments and really being over reliant on it, they think, well, there just needs to be more vigilance on the part of faculty or talk a little bit about that part of your story.
Yeah, well, there are definitely people who say that this, policing academic integrity in this way is just not the right approach. And this is a pedagogical question, really. It's how does a faculty member approach their relationship with a student, their role as an instructor? What is the goal here? And so I have heard people who use Turnitin, and actually the professor I mentioned in the story was she was the first tester of Turnitin back in 2004 at College of the Canyons. She said for a while she used the Turnitin similarity report as a teaching tool. And so if it highlighted some plagiarized text, she would send it to the student and say, it flagged this, take another look at how you're citing your sources and just revise it and send it back. And so in some ways, this can be used as a tool to help students understand proper citation. I'm not sure that is so true anymore, just because at College of the Canyons, for example, I interviewed an English professor. He was saying, this whole year he doesn't really see actual plagiarism flags that amount to anything more than innocuous text matching. It's really the AI generated writing that's getting in the way of these papers. And so in terms of the teaching tool, that maybe doesn't exist anymore. But certainly there are faculty who say, students are turning to AI to help them complete their assignments faster, to get questions answered, because they don't have time. They're overstretched. They don't understand the assignment. They're afraid of asking the professor questions. And if you get to the root of the problem there, I mean, that's something else that a professor could take the time to solve rather than using a detector to police, the writing that's in front of them. So, there is an educator in the story who says, this is about relationships. This is about forming strong relationships with your students from the beginning, making sure they know they can come to you with questions. And that's kind of the kinder way to approach it, I guess. I mean, if the goal is to develop good relationships with students, teach them as much as you can and kind of send them off, which of course is in contrast to people who really, they want the policing approach. They want to make sure that students aren't skating through their classes with credit that they don't deserve. But in working on this project and in looking at and in seeing examples of AI generated writing, I'm not sure that what a chatbot could spit out from a prompt deserves an A anyway. And so it's not like students are able to just type in a prompt and then submit the paper that it spits out and actually do great in the class. Maybe they won't fail, and some people could think that's a problem. But yeah, it really, there's definitely an element of this that goes back to pedagogy and what the goal of the instruction is.
Right. You've also written about AI being used for college and career advising. What are the pros and cons of that?
Yeah, so this is another way AI could be used. Schools all over the country are trying to find ways, and ed tech companies are certainly presenting options for them. But I reported on there's just a bunch of college and career advising tools that are AI driven available online. And so I was looking into reports that these might start making their way into high schools. And I spoke with Julia Freeland Fisher at the Christensen Institute, who is very concerned about how tech can get in the way of students' development of social capital, meaning, the relationships they're making that can end up serving them well later in life. And so for sure, it is the case that schools do not have enough college counselors. They don't have enough career counselors. The student to counselor ratio is way out of whack, literally everywhere. I guess maybe not literally at every single school, but certainly on average in every single state. And so these tools can scale advising where there are not enough advisors. But as Julia is kind of ringing the alarm bell about, there are social capital implications to this. So if students have adults in their network that they could be going to ask questions and they're not because they can get a faster answer from ChatGPT, that's a problem, because that means that's one fewer relationship that the student has the opportunity to build. And so there's this tension between something being better than nothing, and the reality that young people are growing up in a world where there are an increasing number of AI-driven chatbots that they can talk to. And if students are funneling more and more of their relationship time into parasocial relationships with tech bots, that's a real problem for their lives. And so I actually saw some of these concerns while reporting on the Turnitin story, talking to a lot of students about how they're actually using ChatGPT. And a lot of students were not using it to just, copy and paste in their essay prompt and then get an essay that they could turn in. They're using it in pretty thoughtful ways to get questions answered, to help them get started, to craft an outline, to help, improve their writing on the back end once they have a draft. And so those are things, my generation, we might have gone to a writing center on campus to get some of that advice. Or I distinctly remember talking to a professor during office hours about, the thesis statement of a paper. And he helped me formulate a good thesis statement, that got me an A on the paper. And it's like, sure, maybe if I were a student today, I could have done that brainstorming with ChatGPT, but I wouldn't have had that conversation with that professor that I could draw on even today. So I actually have a story. Everyone wants to follow CalMatters. I have a story coming out maybe next week, just looking deeper into the implications of this. Chatbots are in some ways making students more self-sufficient, and that can be nice. And people always talk about how busy and overstretched students are. So if they can have help at any hour and have any, get any question answered, that can seem valuable. And a lot of colleges I know are developing their own internal chatbots and making it easier for students to get financial aid questions answered online, for example, or admissions questions or any number of things. There are all these chatbots, public facing chatbots. And maybe it will get more students information faster. And certainly it's going to diminish the time that employees are spending responding one-on-one to the same questions over and over. That can feel really useful, and maybe feel better than an FAQ page, but it's probably not better than a human-to-human conversation.
Is there any regulation around AI use in schools?
Well, there's not really. So California is trying to regulate AI companions. And so these are chatbots that are designed, they're consumer facing. These are not student facing necessarily in schools, but obviously young people are coming across them. And so think, character AI, people may have heard of, Replica. There are companies that let people create an account and then start a chat. They can design their, ideal chatbot and then have conversations, develop relationships with them. So these are called AI companions. California has been trying to regulate them and make sure that young people are not basically given the opportunity to develop unhealthy relationships with these chatbots. The problem is that the federal government is trying to put a 10-year moratorium on any state level AI regulation. And so maybe Congress does that and then steps in with its own nationwide regulation. But if they don't, and states like California that have kind of the will to move some regulation forward are not allowed to, we're basically left with just this kind of Wild West situation with AI.
Right. Okay, we have a few minutes left, so we'd like to take any questions. If anybody has one, just raise your hand and try to answer it for you.
While people are thinking of questions, knowing that we have a large library audience, I will just mention that some reporting I did last year for the markup is called digital book banning, this idea that online via content filters on the internet, on school website or on school computers, but as well as on library computers, that can end up limiting young people's access to much of the information on the web. And so my story focused really on what was happening in schools, but I had wanted to kind of circle back and look at public libraries. And then I wonder if there are people here with experience with that. I mean, I had been hearing this kind of equity element that libraries that didn't want to put the filters on their computers and were in affluent enough areas that they had plenty of tax money to keep them afloat and didn't need federal dollars that were tied to the use of these filters, that they could just forego them. And then of course, if you didn't have the kind of financial independence, then you needed to use the filters. The filters can be set however people want them, as long as they're keeping young people away from porn, basically. My story really looked into how schools go much further than that, and I found evidence that some school districts were keeping kids from Planned Parenthood, for example, other sex education resources, LGBTQ resources, even the Trevor Project, which is suicide prevention supports for LGBTQ teens. So anyway, just flagging that's those filters are also not very technical. And so maybe actually, I haven't heard, maybe AI will make them more sophisticated on the back end. But in the meantime, nothing I reported on was really being driven by AI.
Right. Okay, well, if we don't have any questions, thank you all for attending today, and reach out to us anytime with questions, ideas, concerns, and we'll do our best to respond. Thank you. Have a great
story.
yeah.
I'll just flag. So the story, it came out in two parts. There was one, The main story really detailed kind of all of the nuanced problematic elements of Turnitin use. And then a companion story just looked deeper at these price disparities. And I'm sure library people here, if you have dealt with procurement, you know, sometimes other library systems get better deals. Sometimes certain school districts or certain colleges get better deals. So looking more closely at those numbers I had cited at the beginning, the second story goes into that. And there's a searchable box if you're curious, if any of you are curious about your alma mater, if it's a CSU school, UC, or among 1/3 of the community colleges, you might be able to find out how much they spent over time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.